All right. Well, I think pretty much everybody knows who I am. I don't know if we have anybody that's joined us that doesn't. So what this is about? Oh, here's John Coleman. I think just showing up. So what this was about, there was just one of the discussions we had at a breakfast a while back. Several people were talking about installing Linux on a laptop or a computer of theirs, and it's new to them, and I said that I would offer an introduction to installing and using Linux presentation sometime if it was of help, and they thought that that might be of help. So that's what this is. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through a slideshow here, first of all, and we're going to try to take a high level look at what things make up a desktop operating system. And this is not specific to Linux. It'll be start out in general, and then what that'll do is help us identify some of the ways that Linux differs from other operating systems, such as Windows, and why that is. And then we'll go ahead and walk through a Linux install. That'll be the next thing. We'll take a look at some of the programs that are installed and how to install additional software. And then finally, we'll take a look at a little bit of ham radio software for Linux. So that's the intention here. Feel free to interrupt me anytime with a question. And also, I'm getting over a cold, so if I have to stop and hack for a bit, I apologize for that. All right, so let's get started. The parts of a desktop operating system. And again, this is general purpose information at this point. One of the most important things, but the thing you don't really see, is the kernel. What in the world is the kernel? You may have heard of that term, you may not have. According to Wikipedia, the kernel is a computer program at the core of the computer's operating system and generally has complete control over everything in the system. It is the portion of the operating system code that is always resident in memory and facilitates interaction between hardware and software components. Well, that's nice sounding, but I'm not sure that's too helpful. Here's a little picture that is also on Wikipedia. You see that you have the computer hardware at the bottom, CPU, memory, devices, and then applications, and the kernel kind of is the glue that fits in between there. Here's another maybe a little more detailed look at it. So in a modern computer, you've got lots of hardware. You've got your CPU, you've got your memory, you got your hard drive, display, keyboard, mouse, sound card, network interface, cameras, scanners, printers, you name it. And that varies. Each computer is a little different in terms of what hardware it has. Sometimes you add hardware, sometimes you remove hardware. At the same time, on a modern computer system, you want to be able to run multiple applications at the same time. So these are programs that you run. These are your your word processor program, your PSK program, your web browser. All of these things you're running at the same time, and many times you may have several dozen applications running at once. You also have the issue of multiple users. Now, in a desktop computer, that may not be as common, but you could potentially have multiple users trying to run applications on the computer at the same time. The kernel's job is simply to orchestrate all of that and make that all work, to make the hardware available to the various applications and to the users and so on. So it's involved in hardware management, process management. Process is another term we'll use for an application, kind of. You've got memory management. The thing about the kernel is there's no direct interaction with the user. You don't really see that. You don't interact with it, so you don't even really know it's there. But it's a very important part of the computer. there's no user interface associated with the kernel. So, but with only a kernel installed, you really can't do much, but yet it's one of the most important parts of the operating system. Okay, so that's that. I'm not going to get any further in the weeds in that. The next step, or the next piece, is since we don't have a user interface with the kernel, we need that. And in most desktop operating systems nowadays, we've got a graphical user interface or a desktop environment, right? So this is what you actually see when you turn on your computer. This is the windows, if you will. When you turn on your computer and you see the desktop and you see the icons and all that, that's your graphical user interface. That's what you interact with. It presents to you generally speaking, a windowing environment for applications. So each time you start a program, that program starts up in its own little window, and you can manipulate those windows and move them around. It provides a way to start the application. So again, in Windows, you have the Start button, usually down at the bottom left corner. That gives you a way to start new applications. You also sometimes have like a quick bar along the bottom where you can launch applications and see what's running, that kind of thing. It allows you to change settings, with control panel type applications. Okay, that's your graphical user interface. The next thing you have, you need, generally speaking, are a set of utility applications, right? So this would be like your file manager, like the Windows Explorer. This gives you the ability to browse files that you have on your hard drive, that kind of thing. A lot of times, most operating systems will come with a simple text editor, such as Notepad in Windows. Maybe a little calculator application, so on and so forth. And this is a very, very, small list. There's usually a lot more installed than this, but it gives you some ideas of what we're talking about. Probably a multimedia player to play music or video. Okay. So again, the parts of a desktop operating system, we've got the kernel, we've got the graphical user interface, we've got some utility applications. Generally, nowadays, we also have some internet applications. So you've got like your web browsers or your email clients. These all come pre-bundled or pre-installed with the operating system nowadays. And then a lot of times, or most things nowadays also have available some form of a software repository. Like Windows, you have the Microsoft App Store, and on the Mac OS, you have the Apple App Store. This gives you the ability to install some additional software if you need to. You can also get software from other sources as well, but the software repository has become a pretty common part of an operating system. Okay, so that's, and we could divide up this topic into a lot more pieces than that. That's just some general big view parts of the operating system. And so in the case of Windows, which I'm assuming most people are familiar with, that's probably the most popular operating system. When you get a Windows computer, whether you buy it, buy a computer pre-built or you install it from a DVD or something, you get all these things. And you find out that, well, okay, the kernel is made by Microsoft. It is programmed by Microsoft, provided by Microsoft. Well, so is the graphical user interface. So are all the utility applications, the internet applications like Edge and Outlook and stuff like that. And the software repository is as well. So everything is provided by Microsoft, and Microsoft is a large company. They have lots of developers. They are the ones that hold the keys when it comes to Windows. The software is, for the most part, all proprietary and closed source. So you can't go and see how things are really working under the hood. You can obviously purchase or download additional software, but the stuff you get with the operating system is all Microsoft. So now let's take a look at Linux, because this is where things start to become a little different, and this is maybe where some confusion gets introduced for people not familiar with this. So in Linux, the kernel is produced by the Linux kernel project. And that's it. That's all that Linux is. When you say the word Linux, what you really are talking about is you're talking about the Linux kernel. And the Linux kernel project is involved in that. So let's take a look at that a little bit further. The Linux kernel was a project that was started in 1991 by a guy by the name of Linus Torvalds when he was a student at the University of Helsinki. He modeled his kernel after the Unix operating systems that had been around for a long time, originally starting with AT&T Bell Labs. His kernel was targeted towards the x86 hardware. That's what made his system somewhat unique. Most of the Unixes of the day were for like mainframe type computers. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to put together a Unix-like kernel that would work on standard x86 hardware. And back at that time, it was the Intel 386 was the kind of the CPU of the newest CPU from Intel. And the other thing that was unique about what he did is once he had something kind of working, he released that kernel into the community under an open source license. And he said, look, this is something I'm playing with. If it's interesting to anybody, you can use it. If you have some things you'd like to, or you'd like to work on it, just contribute back anything that you do. And today, Linus is still the head maintainer of the Linux kernel project, but it is developed by hundreds of developers all around the world, and many people contribute to that. Okay, so I talked a little bit earlier about kind of what the kernel is. It's the very most important part of the operating system. It's what holds everything together. But with the kernel only, you really don't have anything. So how do we come up with a usable operating system if the only thing that the Linux project is about is the kernel? Okay, so we need a graphical user interface. Well, it turns out there are many open source projects out there that can be used as a graphical user interface or a desktop manager. They're not made by the Linux project, but they're made by other groups of people that are interested in this kind of thing. And so there's a lot of them. Here's some common names. One of them is called GNOME, KDE, Cinnamon, XFCE, Mate, LXDE, Budgie, and then there's others. Those are just some of the biggest names that you hear about regarding to graphical user interfaces. Okay, so what about the utility applications that we need? Well, many of those desktop manager projects also include some utility apps with the products that they do, but there's other independent projects as well that produce all kinds of utility applications that can be used on a Linux system. What about internet applications? Well, Firefox makes a version that works on Linux. Chrome, there's a Linux version of Chrome. Brave, just as a kind of small party example. Thunderbird is a common email program, sort of like Outlook. But again, there's a variety of different choices here made by a bunch of different entities. Software repository, we'll get to that in just a second. So we have a problem. The problem is, how do we put together a complete and usable Linux-based operating system when all of the different parts are made by different organizations, right? In the case of Windows, it's all made by Microsoft. They package the whole thing together, they give it to you, boom, you're done. But here we have many different entities involved how do we put this all together? How do we choose which pieces of that software to use? The solution to that is what we call the Linux distribution. And one of the things that bothers new Linux people a lot is the fact that there are many distributions out there. And how do I choose which one to use, and what is that all about? Why is there so many different versions of Linux? Well, this is why. Because there's so many different pieces of software out there. Soon after the Linux kernel was started to gain interest in the early 90s, the Linux distribution as a concept began to emerge. So what the Linux distribution is a project that is taken under by somebody, and their goal is to pull together all of the packages that you need along with the Linux kernel and produce a complete, easy to install and easy to use operating system. So over the years, the Linux distributions have evolved. There have been and currently are today hundreds of different distributions that one can choose from. So the modern Linux distribution includes the Linux kernel, obviously, or I assume obviously. It generally includes one or more desktop environment. That's the GUI. So that list of possibilities, it'll include one or more of those. It will include a collection of applications that you need. It includes, this is why I said stay tuned on the software repository. It turns out that the software repository also becomes a function of the Linux distribution to a large extent. Part of the distribution project is to make additional software available through a software repository. It includes an installer, which makes it easy to install. And it also includes with it a community of developers and users that maintain the system, are available to answer questions, and so on and so forth. One thing that's kind of interesting about how distributions work, they tend to build off of each other. And it turns out that there's three major distributions that started back in the early 90s that still remain today. And those are named Slackware, Debian, and Red Hat. Most of the hundreds of distributions that have existed and still exist today are spin-offs of those. So they will, rather than starting completely fresh, people will take something that exists and then they will modify it to suit whatever purpose that they want. So that still doesn't answer the question, which distribution should I choose? Because there's hundreds of them out there. How do I know? Well, it turns out most of those hundreds of distributions are really for very niche type purposes. And you have a certain set of Linux distributions that have raised to the top and have become very popular among a large group of people and have a focus towards being the type of distribution that would be useful to a beginner. On the Debian side, again, Debian was one of the original ones and it still exists today. And there's a variety of things downstream from Debian that have been produced. Ubuntu is a very popular one, and it is often cited as a distribution that is good for a beginner to Linux. There's actually several flavors of Ubuntu, but we'll just say that. Then we also have one called Linux Mint, and we'll be looking at Linux Mint in detail today. It's actually downstream from Ubuntu. They took Ubuntu and they forked it, and they added some things and modified some things to make something new out of Ubuntu. On the Red Hat side, you have Fedora, which is also sometimes cited as a good distribution for beginners. All right, so we're going to look, like I said, at Linux Mint in particular. So Linux Mint is a distribution of Linux. This is how they describe themselves on their website. They say that the purpose of Linux Mint is to produce a modern, elegant, and comfortable operating system, which is both powerful and easy to use. They say it works out of the box with full multimedia support and is extremely easy to use. They say it's both free of cost and open source. It's community driven. The users are encouraged to send feedback to the project so that their ideas can be used to improve. It's based on Debian and Ubuntu. It provides about 30,000 packages. That's the software repository part of it. And has one of the best software managers. It's safe and reliable. They attribute that to a conservative approach, a unique update manager, and the robustness of the Linux architecture. And they say Linux Mint requires very little maintenance. Linux Mint's been around about 17 years now. It's currently on version 21.1. You see the website URL there. By default, it uses the Cinnamon desktop, although it has some other varieties as well. But we'll be looking at the Cinnamon desktop under Linux Mint. All right. That was the slideshow boring presentation part. Next step, we will actually go and do an install, but I want to pause. Are there any questions with anything I've talked about so far?
I have a question.
Go for it.
How does the Linux system, operating system, and the kernel and so forth, in terms of viruses out there? You know, viruses seem to hit Windows operating systems quite common. How does Linux interface or deal with the virus issues?
Excellent question. So, traditionally speaking, most people would probably say that Linux has very little problem with viruses. That is beginning to change. There's two reasons why an operating system might not have virus problems. One possible reason would be architecturally. Somehow the way the operating system is designed makes it less susceptible to viruses, makes it harder for viruses to be written for it or to get installed or that kind of thing. That's one possibility. The other possibility is viruses and other malware are really driven by opportunity. What has the highest opportunity for the most effect? And because, you know, most people out there are using Windows, that's the biggest target, right? And so, you know, somebody that wants to put a virus out into the wild that's going to have the most effect, they're probably going to target it towards Windows, because that's what's mostly out there. So which is it? Does Linux not have as much virus problems because of its architecture or because it's not as popular, not as big a target? The answer is both. There are architectural things that make writing viruses somewhat more difficult for Linux, but viruses are getting more and more sophisticated, and with more and more people using Linux in various forms, it's becoming a bigger and bigger target. So I will say this: I run Linux almost exclusively on my own personal stuff. I don't run any virus protection at all, and I've never had a problem. A lot of people can say that. However, that day may be changing. There are more and more sophisticated malware becoming targeting Linux. So it's a moving question, or the answer to the question is a moving thing. Traditionally, it has not been nearly as susceptible, but that may change over time. Does that answer the question? Anything else?
Raspbian, where does that come in?
Good question. So Raspbian is a Linux distribution for a very specific hardware platform, right? So the hardware platform in that we're talking about there is the Raspberry Pi, and I think most of you kind of know what a Raspberry Pi is. At least it's the little single board computers that you can get through the Raspberry Pi company. And Raspbian is a distribution, so it has all the features that we talked about that a distribution has, that is targeted towards that Raspberry Pi computer. One of the things about it that is different than, say, Linux Mint is that the Raspberry Pi, unlike most desktop and laptop computers, most desktop and laptop computers out there have x86 hardware architecture. That means they have Intel CPU and chipset or AMD CPU and chipset. The traditional x86 computer architecture, which is what Linux was originally designed to target. And so Linux Mint is intended to install on that kind of hardware. The Raspberry Pi, however, does not use that kind of hardware. It uses hardware called ARM, ARM, and that's a completely different CPU and chipset, requires the software to be compiled in a different way. And so Raspbian is a distribution of Linux. It's derived, I believe, still from Debian. It was originally, I think it still is downstream of Debian. And it is compiled specifically for the Raspberry Pi hardware. So you would not generally install Raspbian on a laptop because it's not targeted for that. Anything else?
Steve, I have a question.
Go for it.
If you install Linux Mint on a Windows machine, will Linux Mint remove Windows for you?
Yes and no. So again, a very good question. So what I'm going to go through today, if you go through the install process like what I'm going to show you today, the answer is yes. It will wipe off whatever is there, Windows or otherwise, and replace it with Linux Mint. It is, however, possible to install Linux, whether it be Mint or another distribution, alongside Windows. And there's a couple ways you can do that. You can do what's called a dual boot setup. That takes a little bit more to do, and is a little bit specific to your particular situation. So that's why I'm not demonstrating it today, because it would be a little bit different for everybody. But it is possible to say, all right, we're going to go in and we're going to take our Windows installation and we're going to shrink it down so it uses less hard drive space. And then we're going to install the Linux on the free space. And we're going to make it possible that when you turn your computer on, you can specify boot into Windows or boot into Linux. Okay, so that's a possibility. The other thing you can do, and this is a little bit bigger topic perhaps than I want to get too far in the weeds on, although it's what I'm actually going to be doing here, and that is you can install another operating system as a virtual machine running on your existing operating system. That's a bigger topic. I'm happy to talk about it at some point if anybody's interested. That's actually what I'm going to be doing, and it makes it possible so that I can show you what I'm doing. I'm actually going to be installing Linux Mint as a virtual machine on my existing computer. So that is another way you can go about doing it. Anything else? All right, well, we'll move on then, and if there's any other questions as they come up, be sure to ask. Okay, so I'm going to show this. This is my web browser. This is the Linux Mint webpage. Okay. If you decided that you want to go ahead and install Linux Mint, this is where you want to come. The thing we'll first do is we will go ahead and click the download button. And here we see that there are, like I did mention, there are several different editions or versions. The one that's kind of their flagship version is the Cinnamon edition. It means it's using the Cinnamon desktop as opposed to the Mate or the XFCE desktop. We'll go ahead and focus on Cinnamon. You hit download there, and then they've got a number of mirrors here that you can download it from, and you just click on one of those and it will download to your computer. I'm not going to do that right now because it takes a while, and I've already done that. But that's how you would go about downloading it. Now, the next thing you have to do is you want to take that image that you download and put it onto like a USB stick. Now that takes you can't just drag it onto a USB stick. You have to actually make a bootable USB stick with that image. How do you do that? Well, there's a variety of software that you can use that will do that. If you have something you're familiar with, go ahead and use it. If you're not, I'm going to show you kind of a maybe a little bit of an odd option, or it might look odd initially. And we're going to get back to Larry's question about the Raspberry Pi. So Raspberry Pi has a tool that they call the Raspberry Pi Imager. This guy right here. Actually, I wanted to go to here. The Raspberry Pi Imager. So if you are messing around with a Raspberry Pi, you need to create an SD card to act as your hard drive for the Raspberry Pi. And so you have a need to do something like copying or writing an image to a piece of hardware like an SD card. And so they have a tool specifically designed to do that. And they made it generic enough that you can use it to make a USB stick out of a disk image of any sort, not necessarily only Raspberry Pi. So that's what I'm going to recommend you use if you don't have something you don't already like for that. So you would download this Raspberry Pi imager. It runs on Windows, it runs on Mac OS, it runs on Linux. So about anything, you can download that. And then I'm going to show you what that looks like. Once you start it, it looks like that's what it looks like when you start this Raspberry Pi Imager. And so what you would then do is you would install, or you would put your USB stick into the computer, which you can't see me doing it, but I'm actually doing that here. You click this to choose your operating system, scroll all the way to the bottom and select Use Custom. That will then open up your downloads directory, which you might be able to see, might not be able. And you choose the file that you just downloaded from the Linux Mint website. So the Linux Mint 21.1 Cinnamon 64-bit.iso. That's the file that I would have downloaded from Linux Mint. I then choose my storage location, which is going to be my USB stick that I just put in. Whoops. And then you hit write. I'm not going to do that now because it takes a while, but it will then it will write that image to the USB stick. It will then go through a verification process to make sure it looks good, and then it's done. It's incredibly easy to use, and I've found that this Raspberry Pi Imager is one of the easiest to use pieces of software for this purpose. I will caution you real quick that Don't do this on a USB stick that has stuff on it that you want. It's going to replace everything on the USB stick with this bootable image. All right. So once you have done that, now the next trick is you have to
Can I ask
get
a
your
question?
yeah, go ahead.
So if I have a Windows system, can I go use this Raspberry Pi
Yes.
image?
Yeah,
Okay,
you can go and download that to your Windows system. Like I say, it works on Windows, it works on Mac OS, anything. You can download that. You can then select the image you downloaded from Linux Mint or another distribution. If you're choosing a different distribution, that'll work too. And then point to your USB stick, and it will write that over there to you.
okay.
The next thing you have to do, and again, at this point, we're going to assume that you are you're wanting to install Linux on a desktop or a laptop computer, and we're going to just replace whatever's there with Linux. So the thing you have to do next is you have to get your computer to boot that USB stick. And that is a little bit computer specific. It may just work to put the USB stick in, turn the computer on, and it'll just boot. However, you may also have to hit some sort of a button to bring up a boot manager and say boot off of this USB stick rather than the hard drive. So this is one of those things where if you can't figure it out, I'm happy to get with you sometime, or we can schedule a time to work through some of these computer specific issues.
Steve?
Yeah.
Can you load that onto a DVD drive, either CD or DVD drive?
Yes, that would be another option. Instead of a USB stick, you would just need a software that will do that, which you very well may have, and you can copy that image onto a DVD drive at least. CD might not be big enough. Let's see, how big is that thing? Downloads.
Yeah, that was my other question. Do you
It
need
is.
DVD?
Yeah, it's 2.5 gigabytes. So a CD wouldn't be big enough, but a DVD should be. And so
Thank
then
you.
if you have a computer that can boot off of a DVD drive, that works too. A lot of computers nowadays don't have the optical drives anymore, so the USB stick is the common thing. But yeah, if you have optical drive, that works too. Okay, so assuming that you have successfully managed to download Linux Mint, the image, get it copied onto a USB stick or a DVD, and gotten your computer to boot that, this is what you're going to see on your computer when it comes up. And it's going to give you a couple options here. You want to choose the top option, which is the default, and this will start loading or booting Linux Mint off of that USB stick. So again, what I'm doing here is I'm running this inside of a virtual machine. Ignore the menu stuff here at the top. That's part of the virtual machine software. You won't see that. You also won't see the little icons at the very bottom. Everything in between those is what you would see on your monitor if you did this. So what has actually taken place here is we have actually booted into Linux Mint, and Linux Mint is in fact running on the computer at this point in time. Now it hasn't actually installed yet. It's running off of the USB stick, but you can actually use it in this form. And at this point, we haven't done anything to your hard drive. Your Windows or whatever is still intact. You can run Linux just in this format, but it's going to be really slow because you're using the USB stick as the hard drive. But it is kind of useful to just make sure it's going to run at all on your computer. And so I'm not going to do much more than that, but you can run it just like this. But what you really want to do is you want to double click on this CD looking icon at the top that says install Linux Mint. And so this now is going to start the process of actually installing the software on your computer. Okay, so first thing we have to do is choose what language you want to use. I assume you want to use English, so that's the default. We'll hit the continue button. Then we have an option for keyboard layout. Unless you have a specific case, US English is what you want. So basically, we're just going through and telling a few things about how we want to install this. Do you want to install multimedia codecs? Yes, you probably do. So just check that, hit continue. One of the things that will happen here at some point is if you're using like a laptop that has Wi-Fi, at some point it'll ask you to enter your Wi-Fi credentials so that you have internet access. My internet access here is hardwired, so it figures that out by itself. But just know that if you're doing this on a laptop that has Wi-Fi, at some point you'll have to enter that. Okay, here is where things start to really get critical, in the sense that the option that we're being given here is that we're going to erase the disk, the hard drive, and install Linux Mint. So this goes to John's question. The default here is to blow away what's on the computer and replace it with Linux Mint. If you were trying to do something else, like a dual boot, this is where you would have to do some different things. But you have to do some stuff before this to set up that possibility. For now, we're just going to say install now. It's going to give us a warning. Are you sure you want to do this, basically? Because this is going to destroy everything on that disk. We will say continue. All right. Wants to know what your time zone is. It's figured it out automatically here. If it doesn't, you can adjust that. All right, now it wants to know a little bit about you. You enter your name. If you have a name you want to give this computer, like say this is going to be my Ham Shack computer, you pick a username for yourself, whatever you like, and you enter a password. I think I typed that wrong. All right, and that's really about all you have to do there. Continue. All right, and now we're actually installing. Now this process is going to take a couple minutes, so if there's any other questions, you can ask right now, or if you need to run to the restroom or grab a drink or something, this will be about, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 minutes.
Steve, do you have to go through that process, or can you load Linux Mint directly from their website onto your computer?
You pretty much have to go through this process. You've got to, well, they may have it in, I don't know if Linux Mint does. There are some Linux distributions that do have an installer that you can download into your Windows, onto your Windows computer, say, and actually run it from Windows, and it will go into the install process by itself. That does exist on certain distributions. I don't know if Linux Mint has that option. Generally speaking, you do have to download the image, get it onto a bootable media, and then boot the computer with that media.
Okay, thanks.
Steve, I was trying to look and see. I have an HP Stream that it's an internet computer. Let's put it that way. And
Kind of like a Chromebook or something, yeah.
Yeah, and I want to push it into this Cinnamon. So the question I had on it is, it's got 4 gig of RAM, and it's for a hard disk, it's got 30 gig.
Mhm.
Is that enough? Because
That's plenty, yeah. In fact, interestingly enough, that's exactly what I am installing on here in terms of a virtual machine. 4 gig of RAM and 30 gig hard drive. And I guess I hadn't really mentioned this. One of the reasons people like Linux, I mean, there's lots of reasons that people do, and there's lots of reasons people don't. But one of the reasons that people like it is that it is tends to be very lightweight, meaning it does not take a whole lot of memory. It doesn't take a whole lot of disk space compared to Windows, for example. And so, a computer, a kind of a, shall we say, the lower end computers, or the like what you're talking about, the ones that aren't meant for big desktop applications, or if it's an older computer, you can get a lot of use out of those with Linux. Now, there might be some little gotchas, like on, I don't know about the HP Stream. My guess is that would be pretty easy to install on. There are some laptops out there, probably most notably like the Chromebooks, that are designed very specifically to run Chrome OS, and you can install Linux on those, but it's a little tricky. You have to go through some additional iterations, I believe. So if you have one of those kind of computers, you probably have to do a little bit of research on how to go ahead and actually get the process started to install. But once you get to this point, and actually installing it, then what I do here should be pretty similar to what you would do.
I have a question, Steve.
Yep.
And you kind of addressed a little bit of it just now, and maybe you're going to address more of it in the future. But advantages or disadvantages? Why would I want to use Linux over Windows, or why would I not want to use Linux over Windows? What are the advantages or disadvantages to one or the other?
Well, that's a big question. And the answers to that question, there's philosophical answers to that question, there's technical answers to that question, there's personal preference answers to that question. So, when the slideshow that I went through, and I kind of, tried to highlight how Linux is different than Windows. And one of those differences is that Windows, or Mac OS, the same thing apply, is a very proprietary closed source entity. It is made by a single company, and it is you don't have the ability to modify it. It also comes with a license agreement that you may or may not realize. A modern Windows license agreement, the license agreement does not give you the rights to own that software. All that license agreement is doing technically is giving you the right to use that software on a particular computer. You do not have the right to copy it onto something else or to make certain modifications. It's very restricted in what you can do with it. Whereas Linux is a very open situation. It is produced by a large group of people, differing groups of people. It's almost all of the software is open source, which means you can go and look at the source code if you want. The license agreement associated with it is a very permissive license agreement, meaning you can do with it whatever you want to use it for. You can use it for commercial purposes. You can use it for personal purposes. It really doesn't matter. So from a philosophical point of view, that attracts a lot of people. From a technical point of view, one of the reasons you might choose Linux is what I just said. Maybe you have an older computer that you want to get some use out of, and Windows is it's just bogging down too much. And so a Linux distribution may run very, very well on an older computer, whereas Windows hardly works anymore. So that would be kind of a technical reason. The question you asked earlier about viruses and being, somewhat less susceptible to malware might be a reason you would choose Linux. Why wouldn't you choose Linux? Well, it's not as popular. If you're the type of person that likes to go to the computer store and buy a piece of software, or just go on the internet and find, a piece of software that is a popular piece of software and you want to download and install that, well, that might be a Windows only software. You might not be able to install that on your Linux computer. Maybe you can find something equivalent, but like, for example, if you are really, really into using Microsoft Office, okay, that doesn't run on Linux, at least not today. That could change eventually, but there's alternatives, and I'll show you an alternative here in a second. But so that would be maybe a reason you would choose not to, just because you want to be in a larger ecosystem where you don't have to pick and choose software quite as carefully. Those are some of the reasons. There's more, and I'll actually bring up another one later on. All right, we've gotten to the end of the install process, and it's sitting here telling us restart now. So I'm going to restart now. And we're now rebooting. It's going to tell you to remove your install medium. So this would be the USB stick or the DVD. You remove that, you hit enter, and now we're going to boot up. Now, if you've ever installed Windows from scratch, a lot of people never really do that. You buy a computer, it comes with Windows, there you go. But if you've ever taken a Windows DVD or whatever and installed it from scratch, one of the things you will have noticed is that this install process was about, I don't know, took about the 10th of the time that it takes to install Windows. Just a little anecdote. Okay, so it asked for my password. This is what I entered in earlier. And lo and behold, we have a Linux Mint operating system. It comes up first with this welcome thing. I'm going to turn that off. If you want to use that to sort of walk you through a few things, you can, but we don't need that now. So here's what it looks like. And I'm going to make one quick change here to increase the resolution a little bit. That's not what I wanted. This. And I'll show you this a little more in a bit. There. That makes it a little bit bigger. Okay. Here is your Linux Mint desktop. And you will notice that it looks really a little bit like Windows, right? So down here on the bottom right corner, you have your system tray where you have your clock, you have your sound settings, your volume setting, network stuff, a few other things. Over on the left-hand side, you have effectively a start menu.
That time I did those off.
What's that? Okay. Obviously, it looks a little different, but it's laid out very much like you would expect if you're a Windows user. You have some launcher icons here, and we'll look at those a little bit more. All right, so what kind of software do we have available here just out of the gate? So this is our start button. We're going to kind of just walk through some of these categories here real quick. On the left side, these are kind of common use things. So this big button here at the bottom, this is how you would reboot or shut down the system. You'd hit restart or shut down. I won't do that right now. let's look at this guy here. This is your file manager, and you can get to it here. You can get to it on this start bar down here. So this is equivalent to your Windows Explorer. This is how you would go and look at the files that you have on your computer. So when you did as the install happened, it created an account on the system for you with the username that you specified. And in your home directory, you have these folders. These folders are currently empty, like documents folder, but this is where document files will go, or downloads, various things like that. Very similar to what you would see in Windows, quite frankly. We have this guy here. This is our system settings. So this is very much like what you would maybe think of as your control panel in the Windows world. So this lets you set all kinds of things, make all kinds of setting changes. The one I did just a second ago was I went to display and I changed my display resolution. If you had like multiple monitors, they would show up here and you could adjust settings associated with those. Yeah, excuse me. I'm still getting over a cold, so. Okay, so that's some system settings. Other things, backgrounds. Maybe you don't like that background, so they give you some other backgrounds you can choose from. Let's choose that one for now. And I'll show you how you can customize that here in just a bit. So let's see, some other system settings. I'm not going to go through every one of these, but let's see, what would be useful to show you? Well, like screensaver. So by default, after 15 minutes of inactivity, a screensaver will come up. I don't like, that's too quick for me. I'd rather that be 30 minutes. It's really all of the kinds of things that you would expect to be able to set, you will probably find here. Sound settings, your volumes, left-right balance. If you have different audio devices, this is where you would configure those. Printers, if you need to set up a printer, you could add a printer from here. If you want to adjust some stuff as far as how responsive the mouse is or keyboard, those kind of things are here. Network settings. Again, if you had a Wi-Fi, you'd maybe set up your Wi-Fi there, and so forth. So that's the system settings. Again, that's this little icon here, or you can also go to preferences here, and all of those things can be found in this menu here. All right, what else do we have here? Accessories. So it comes with some accessory applications, like a little calculator, right? Pretty standard stuff. There is a document viewer. This is actually sort of like Adobe Acrobat. So like if you needed to open up a PDF file or something like that, the document viewer would do that. Text editor. So this is sort of like the Notepad program that you have in Windows. So if you need to edit a text file, this text editor can do that for you. Let's see what else. Thought there was one other thing. There's some other things. I'm not going to go through them all. That's the major ones. You have some a little bit of graphics tools. So you have a simple drawing tool here. So this would be sort of like your Microsoft Paint type of a program. I'll let you do some very simple drawing type stuff. Document scanner, if you have, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Well, okay. Yeah, if you had a scanner, Oh, it's gonna. There. If you had a scanner, you could use that to run your scanner. Internet applications. Okay, so we have Firefox already installed. This Firefox works just like the version does that you might install in Windows. You have to go through a little setup here, but so this is Firefox. You can go to Google, like what you would normally do, and go to our website, right? So this is works just like a normal Firefox would work. Here's something I'm going to do real quick. I'm going to open that image up in a new tab. I'm now going to save that image, and it's going to save it into my downloads folder. All right. Now I'm going to close Firefox, open up my file manager, look at my downloads folder, right? There's the file I just downloaded. So this works pretty much like you would expect. Also, like you might expect, you can double click on a file and it will open up into an appropriate program. So this is basically a photo or a picture editor. All right, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to right click on it, choose copy, and then go into my pictures folder and paste. So now I've made a copy in my pictures folder. Why did I do that? Well, if I go to my system preferences again and backgrounds, it turns out that one of the things you can do is grab a background from your pictures folder, which I just put there. And so now my background is that. So kind of cool. Some other things here. Other internet applications other than Firefox. HexChat, that's an IRC client, a chat client. Thunderbird, that's a email program, sort of like Outlook. Transmission is a BitTorrent program. If you know what BitTorrents are, then you might know what that is. Otherwise, don't worry about it. Office, the Office category here. Okay, I mentioned Microsoft Office earlier. Microsoft Office doesn't run on Linux, but there is something called LibreOffice that you may or may not be familiar with. LibreOffice is available for Linux. It's available for Windows, for Mac. It is an open source Office suite that does basically the same types of things as Microsoft Office does. So you have like here, LibreOffice Writer is your word processor. And so this is your LibreOffice word processor. You can do most of the same types of things. That you can with Word. It's actually compatible with Word as well. So you could actually load a file that you created in Word into this, and it would load. The fonts and the formatting may be a little different, but it would load the file. So this is a word processor. You've got, I'll talk about that in a bit. You've got a spreadsheet, that LibreOffice Calc. This is your spreadsheet. It works very much like Excel does. And in fact, it will load Excel files. You've got Impress, which is a PowerPoint. This is what I made the slideshow that I did earlier in with Impress. So that's available. LibreOffice also comes with a drawing program. This is more advanced than like the simple drawing program I showed you earlier was. So that's available, and so on. sound and video. So Rhythm Box, this is like a music player. Hypnotics, I don't know how that works. I don't know for sure what it says. You can use it to watch TV. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but anyways, that is really kind of the software that you have when you start with an Linux Mint or a Linux distribution.
Question, Steve.
Was that a question?
Yeah, question. Don't
Yeah.
I hate to interrupt you, but while you're on these software applications, is there an HTML editor?
Not pre-installed, other than, of course, I mean, you can install HTML with just a regular text editor. So you could just use the text editor to edit HTML, but that's not, you know, a designed for purpose HTML editor. So there's not one initially installed, but I'm sure there would be available. And that's what we're going to actually get to next here. So a little bit ago, I had this screen pop up, this one right here. This is your update manager. And just like with Windows, it's important to keep Windows up to date. It's also important to keep Linux up to date as well. And so this tool runs in the background, and it'll pop up when it tells you that there are updates that are available. And you'd basically just say, okay, there. It's going to think for a bit here. Oh, well, okay. There's actually a new version of the update manager. We'll apply that. Here's something worth showing. One of the things that Linux does, and I mean, Windows does this to a certain extent too, but one of the things, Linux is very careful about what things each user level is allowed to do. And so the user that you created and that I'm logged in as that SSANER user, I do not have inherent administrative rights. So if I try to do something that is going to modify the system, it's not going to let me do that unless I enter my password. And so it's trying to update a piece of system software here, and it says, well, you can't do that unless you enter your password and authenticate that you do have the right to do that. And so you're going to see that fairly often, asking for your password. Okay. That updated the update manager. Now here are the actual updates that it wants to install. These are all packages. You don't have to understand what they all are or mean, but generally speaking, it's a good idea to install updates, which you do by clicking that. I'm not going to do that now because it actually takes a little bit of time to download. It's going to have to download those things and install. I don't want to waste time with that at this point, but when the update manager comes up, you come to here, you install the updates, and it's good to keep the system updated. And actually, after you install the updates, it'll probably ask you to restart the computer. Okay, the next thing we want to look at is additional software. So when I read some stuff about the Linux Mint operating system earlier, I think it made the comment that there is like a repository of 30,000 and some pieces of software out there. You can get to those with this application right up here. It's called the Software Manager. So when that comes up, it's going to have to, it's updating its cache of information right now. All right. So what it gives you is it gives you a way to find software that you're interested in. There's some categories here. You can also do a search, but also the items that are on this main page, these are going to be some of your most popular and common applications that you may want to install. And so I'm going to, for example, install GIMP. So if you're familiar with like the Adobe Photoshop program, GIMP is basically, or GNU Image Manipulation Program, that is basically your Linux answer to Adobe Photoshop. Very, very powerful program. So I say I want that. So I click on that, I hit install. It tells me what it's going to install. I hit and say continue. Here again, I have to put my password in to say that I want to go ahead and install that. And it's just going to go ahead and do that. So this makes it incredibly easy to go find additional software that you might want. So first time through it was downloading, now it's installing. It'll just take a minute or two here, or not even that long.
Well, Steve, can I ask
Yeah.
a question?
Yep.
Okay, I have a computer that only has 30 gigabytes of
Yep.
hard disk. Where in this can I tell it to put it, say, on an SD drive or an external drive? You can't.
Well, you really wouldn't want to install stuff to an external drive. What you might want to do is, if you want to use an external drive, that's not really a good place for putting programs. The programs and stuff should really be on the main drive. But if you have like your own files that you want to put on an external drive, what you would do is you would like plug that external drive in, and then that would show up in your file manager, like right here somewhere. And so then you could drag files from these folders over to that if you need to. But actually 30 gigs is quite a bit of space. Let's see here. Do I have a good way? I think under the preferences and disks, where was it? Does this show me? No, that doesn't tell me. I'm used to looking at how much disk space I have in a different way. I don't know where you find that on the, in terms of the GUI. But actually 30 gigs is a lot. You can install a lot of stuff in 30 gigs. All right, so we finished downloading and installing the GIMP here. So if I come back here to my start menu and I go to graphics, I now have GNU Image Manipulation Program. I can start that up. Now I have a very powerful photo editor that I can use. And just as an example, I can open up that same image that we're playing with from the website. And I can do a lot of things like, I can go and I can crop Barb out, that kind of thing. So, so that's an example of how you would actually download and install a piece of software. We'll go and look at a few more things here. Some others you might be interested in. Inkscape, if you want to do vector drawing like you would with like Adobe Illustrator or like Corel Draw or some of those kind of programs, Inkscape is your answer to that. Shotwell, that's a pretty nice photo manager. So like if you do a lot of digital photography and you want to, plug your phone or your camera into the computer and download the images you've taken and organize them, Shotwell is a good application for that. Earlier, Vic asked about HTML editor. We can let's try searching for that and see. Page edit is one example. However, you could also say like, let's just say text editor. not tech, but text. So there's a lot of different text editors out here. And some of these, like I know Atom probably has features for HTML editing specifically. Emacs does. So one of the challenges that you will have if you're getting into Linux is trying to figure out what pieces of software to choose to do the things that you want to do. Because, you know, the program that you use on Windows for that task may not exist in the Linux ecosystem. It might, but it might not. And so you need to find something alternative. Chances are there is an alternative that is just as good or better than the one that you're currently using. But finding that can be a challenge until you start to get used to what's out there. And that's where, you know, asking somebody like me that's been around for a while, you know, I can maybe point you in some directions if you're interested in that. Okay, so let's do this. Ham radio. Okay, you'll start to see here some things you might be familiar with, like FL Rig, and a couple things. But really, what you've got, these pieces here, like this ham radio all, that is actually not a specific program. That is actually a collection of programs. And so if you want to use a Linux Mint for a ham radio computer, what I'd probably recommend you do is install this ham radio all package. And I'm not going to do that at the moment because it takes a while, but I have done that on a different install, and I'm going to boot up that other install here in a second, and I will show you some of those. That is basically what we're talking about. This is what I've shown you is pretty much everything you get when you install Linux Mint. And so then you go and you install the additional software that you need to do whatever it is that you want to do. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and shut down this particular machine. And I'm going to start up another one. All right, this is one I installed earlier and did some configuration to. And we have some differences here. That this looks a little different than it did before. For one thing, the start menu is up here at the top rather than at the bottom. I've got some additional things in various places, and this is to show you that the desktop is very, very customizable. You can move this toolbar to the top or to the side if you want to. You can create a second toolbar, which is what I have down here. And you can install applets into the toolbar. Hang on a second, I just got a text. I need to see if it's important. I doubt it is. No. So like here's a little weather applet that I put on this toolbar here. Gives me my current weather. You'll notice another thing I did up here, I added a second clock. So we've got the regular local time as well as I've got a UTC time. So if I'm using this as a ham radio computer, that might be kind of handy. The other thing I've done on this particular one is I installed all the ham radio applications. And so that's part of what I want to show you here. So when I did that, I have a new category now in my menu for ham radio. And so we've got a collection of applications. Some of these you will probably recognize, like FLDigi, right? That looks pretty much like it looks on Windows. The whole FL stack is here, like FL Message, FL Rig, FL Amp, various things of that sort. So you would use this very much like you would use it in Windows. Other things we have is where to go? Here we go, WSJTX. So if you're interested in the FT8 stuff or whatever. We also have things like JS8 call. You have to set it up first, but basically, so you have JS8 call just like you would expect on Windows. We have things like Chirp, which is a program you would use to configure like your mobile or handy-talkie radio, program channels and stuff like that. It works pretty good for that. There's also one that is, and I don't know how well this one works. I've never really used it, but there's one here for programming DMR radios as well. I don't know what all radios it works with, but it's called, where was it? There, QDMR. That's for configuring DMR radios. You have things like gpredict, where you can see where the various satellites are at and when they're going to make a pass if you're into satellite work. We've got several logging programs. CQR log is a pretty good logging program. One that if you've seen me doing computer logging at like the Beaumont when we've had stations there, I've sometimes been using CQR log. I mean, there's another one here. What was it called? PyQSO. That's a simple logging program as well. You have things like Trusted QSL. So if you're doing Logbook of the World stuff, you need this to set up your Trusted QSL certificates and so forth. There's a bunch of software-defined radio applications in here, such as Cubic SDR, Qt SDR, GNU Radio, and so on. But anyways, when you install all that ham radio all package, you get all of these things. And so, Linux is a very good shack computer if that's what you're wanting to do. So any questions on that? Anything specific you want to see that I haven't already shown you?
Yeah, I have another question. This is kind of a visual, the GUI part of it. I noticed that on your desktop, it doesn't have any icons on the desktop, like, in Windows desktop, you usually have all your icons for your programs or apps or whatever on your desktop. Does Linux not do that?
You can. I think you find that Linux users generally don't put icons on the desktop as much as Windows users do. I'm not exactly sure why that is. I know myself, I'm not a huge fan of icons on the desktop. I prefer to put them on like this start bar. And here, I can actually show you that. So, okay, so let's say I'm a WSJTX user. So I can move that over here onto the desktop, I think. Can I or can't I not? I thought I could. This is going to depend a little bit on which desktop environment you use. I don't know if you can. That's not what I wanted to do. Let's see. And I actually don't use Cinnamon all that much, so I'm not intimately familiar. Here we go. Add to desktop. There it is. So now you can put it on the desktop. You can also where are you at? I didn't move it. Oh, there. You can also add to a panel. So now it's up here as well in this panel. That's what I tend to do. I tend to put the things I want to use the most in these panels rather than the desktop, but you can use the desktop as well. The other thing is in your file manager, you have a link to your desktop. So let's say I go into my downloads, or not downloads, I guess, but pictures. Well, I don't like that either. Do I have anything? All right, let's create a document real quick. Let's go to Office, like the LibreOffice Writer. I'm going to say this is a document, and I'm going to then save it, give it a name, Steve's document. Okay, let me close it. Go into my file manager, go into documents. There's that document file. I'm now going to copy that and put it in the desktop here. And now it shows up anything that shows up in the desktop folder in the file manager actually shows up in the desktop. You can also drag stuff too. So I'm pretty sure you would be able to say, go to this and drag that to the desktop. So yes, you can use the desktop. That really kind of concludes what I was going to show you. Oh, a couple other things. I was going to show you these little icons down here at the bottom. So one of the things that Linux has built in, or most Linux desktop environments have built in, that's kind of cool, are what's called virtual desktops. So let's say we fire up Firefox here. Okay, so we want to use this desktop for our Firefox program and something else. Rather than, okay, before I get to the virtual desktop, let me show you a couple other things. And this is kind of what you would expect, but just like in Windows, you've got your similar things up here in the top right corner. You can like maximize, right? You can also minimize, which puts it up here. So you can also adjust your window sizes, just like you would expect by grabbing a hold of the side like that, right? But rather than cluttering up, this desktop with a bunch of different applications, I can click down here and go to another virtual desktop, and I can like start JTX there, go to another desktop, and start something like, a spreadsheet, and then I can switch back and forth between those desktops. And it just gives you the ability to effectively increase the amount of desktop space you have. I used to use that a lot. Now I use multiple monitors, and so I don't use that feature as much as I used to, but it's pretty nice if you just have a single monitor, or if it's a laptop, type of a thing. Rather than cluttering everything up into one desktop, you can use individual desktops. But that's really about it that I was going to show today. I'm happy to field additional questions. Whatever you guys want to do. Any other further discussion or whatever.
Okay, Steve, I got a question.
Yep.
Okay, I've got I got a stream, HP stream.
Okay.
I'll get this thing going. Okay, and it's got Microsoft Office on it. It's got Microsoft on it. And it takes up about 18 gigs on my hard drive. And I only have a 30 gig hard drive.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at my C drive properties, I've got like something like 29 gigs on it already. Okay, so I probably wouldn't be able to load Linux on it.
You'd be able to replace it with Linux without any trouble.
Okay, that's my next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, 30 gig is plenty for, well, let me put it this way. Windows is going to be bigger than Linux. I think that is a, for the same amount of software or the same amount of functionality, I think you're going to find that Windows is always bigger than Linux. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, the amount of size is dependent on how many, how much software you install, how many files you have. But for, this collection of programs on Windows and a similar collection of programs and files on Linux, Linux is always going to be smaller. I think you can pretty much take that to the bank. So if you want to replace the Windows with Linux, you can almost certainly do it. Now, if what you're trying to accomplish is a dual boot, that's going to cause you trouble, because there you're not intermixing, you can't intermix the files. So you got to have part of your hard drive allocated to the Windows and part of the hard drive allocated to the Linux. And so that becomes a little bit of a difficulty if you have a fairly small hard drive. The other thing, but the other way you can do it is the virtual machine option that I mentioned before. So what you could do, and we could actually probably kind of go through this a little bit if you want to, but you could download a program onto your Windows called VirtualBox. Just Google for it, VirtualBox, and download it. That is the program I'm using here, and I installed Linux Mint as a virtual machine inside of VirtualBox. And you could do that, and so you could install Linux Mint as a virtual machine, and you could play with it and learn about it and see if it's something that you want to use more, and that will just run right alongside of everything else that you have going in Windows. And so if that's the type of thing you want to do, that would be a good option as well.
Steve,
Well, I would like to have this HP stream run Linux and use it as my ham radio.
Well, okay, so I mean, yeah, if you want to dedicate it to being a Linux box, then the 30 gig is going to be fine. You'll be able to install it, install all the ham radio stuff, and do everything, everything you need to do with 30 gig. That shouldn't be a problem. It only becomes a problem if you then install a whole bunch of additional software, or download a bunch of big files, or something of that sort. But 30 gig will take you a long way for a ham shack type computer.
Now my other question is, I have a 24-inch HP plotter, and Mr. Gates has remedied that thing so it will not work on my desktop laptop.
Yeah.
I cannot get it to work no matter what I do. I can plug in a cable, it still won't work. It doesn't have, and HP is not going to create any new drivers for it, period. So it's a boat anchor right now. If anybody wants it, they can have it. But with Linux, it might be possible that I might be able to use it.
What is it again? What's the model?
It's a LaserJet. HP LaserJet,
Probably not LaserJet. It's probably,
inkjet or whatever.
yeah.
Who the picture
It's
of it.
possible. I know some of those can be made to work under Linux. I'd have to do further research on that particular one to
Yeah,
tell you for
Yeah.
sure. But
Yeah.
it is possible, yes.
Okay, good. That's what I wanted to know. So we'll hold it for you.
Along
Barb,
that,
did you have?
along that line, Steve, can you show us, is it possible how much disk space you've used for
Yeah.
what you have right now?
Okay, to do that, I will do another thing that I haven't shown you.
Okay,
Um, this application here that is your terminal window, and I haven't shown you the terminal window. You may be familiar with the fact, you may have heard that on Linux, you have to learn a whole bunch of like commands, right?
Yeah.
Well, part of the reason I haven't shown you this yet is to kind of prove to you that you don't really have to learn a whole bunch of commands necessarily. Most of what you might want to do, you can do through the graphical interface just like you do with Windows. However, the Linux terminal, it can go by a variety of names, is actually a very, very, very powerful thing. And if you become a Linux user, eventually you do want to learn some stuff that you can do here. So the Linux terminal is sort of like the command line tool that you might have in Windows that harkens back to the days of DOS, where you had the actual commands. However, it's way more powerful. There's a way larger ecosystem of commands and programs and stuff that you can do with the Linux terminal. For the beginning user, it's good to know it's there, because one of the things, and actually this is an example, a very specific example that I will show you here, and I will get to your question in a second. And that is, say you want to do something, you want to configure something on your Linux system, you don't know how to do it. So you go to Google and you start, trying to find what it is you want to do. It's not at all unusual that you will find some instructions, and those instructions include entering some commands into the terminal. And so you should know how to find it, how to find the terminal, and kind of what to do with it a little bit, so you can follow those kind of instructions. An example is, if you want to be able to connect your Linux computer to some USB devices, for like ham radio, for example, like your Signal Link or some other kind of digital interface, or you want to connect your computer to your rig, to do rig control type stuff. One of the things you run into is that the Linux permissions system, by default, your normal Linux user does not have write access to the USB serial device. And in order to do that, you need to add your user to a group that has that ability. And so you will see, if you look this up or ask somebody, they will give you a command that looks something like this: sudo usermod -a-g dial out, and then your username. It's like, what the heck does that mean, right? Well, this is a command, and there's probably a GUI way to do this as well, but it's much more difficult to find that GUI way than it is just to enter this command if you know what it is. And so it's going to ask me for my password, and it's just going to do it. And I don't know that it did it, but other than I know that that's what that command does. And so now the dial out group has been added to my user. And so now I would have the ability to write to USB devices. So this is an example of why, even as a beginning Linux user, it's good to know where the terminal program is. And it's because occasionally somebody will give you an instruction here, type this into the terminal and it will do what you need it to do. Now, you asked me about disk space. The reason I'm bringing up the whole terminal thing is that's the way I know best how to find that answer. Right now, with 30 gig, I'm using about half of that, 48%. That's what that tells me right there. I'm sure there's a way on the GUI that I can find that as well. I just don't know because this is how I always do it. So, yes, on a 30 gig drive, I installed the operating system, I installed all those ham radio programs, and I have over half of my drive yet to go. Does that help answer that question a little bit?
Excellent. That's wonderful. That's let me pull that command down though. Thanks, Steve.
Sure. One other thing I was going to mention, the kind of last thing I was going to mention, and this goes back to a question that Vic asked a while ago. He asked, well, what are some of the reasons why you should choose Linux? And one of the things you'll find out about me is sometimes I joke about it, and I'm like, well, if you were using Linux, you wouldn't have that trouble, that kind of joke. But in reality, I am not necessarily any Linux evangelist. My mantra is kind of use whatever you want to use, just don't ask me to fix it, type of a thing. I will say, however, that for those that are interested in ham radio, there is sort of a philosophical reason to embrace Linux. So I think maybe I've just demonstrated that, Linux is this open source operating system that's available to everyone to use however they want. And so it really, the whole ecosystem encourages this sense of experimentation, trying things out, putting together different parts to do something in a way that maybe nobody else has done before. It sort of imbibes those kinds of ideas. Well, that sounds a little bit familiar to us because ham radio is a lot the same way, right? Ham radio is all about experimentation and about trying things a different way and learning how things actually work under the surface and so forth. And so I feel that there is sort of a synergy that exists between the Linux operating system and ham radio, that the type of person that's interested in one of those things may very well be interested in the other as well. And so I don't take that for what it's worth, but that's just kind of how I feel about why a ham radio operator might want to take a look at Linux and see if that's something that would interest them.